Congressman Wittman, it is such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for coming on my podcast and our simultaneous video as well.
Gabriella, thank you. It's an honor to be with you.
Awesome. I want you to introduce yourself to my listeners and to also the viewers who will be chiming in from YouTube as well, because you're one of the probably unlikeliest of Republicans, although not really unlikely because a lot of people in our political movement do partake in outdoor activities, but you're one of the more outspoken sportsmen, I would say, in the Republican caucus. So why don't you introduce yourself to my listeners and talk about what led you to become a sportsman, your background?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I live in the little town of Montrose, Virginia, which is in the Northern Neck, beautiful area, the great outdoors, near the shores of the Potomac River. Lots of great outdoor activities. If you like things from kayaking to hunting to fishing to hiking, this is a great place. You have Westmoreland State Park just up the road, the Potomac River, the Rappahannock River, the Chesapeake Bay, lots of open space. So, you know, I grew up doing just the things that I think folks in small rural areas grow up doing, an interest in hunting and fishing. My father was very much the outdoorsman and taught me the fun of hunting and fishing. I remember some of the lessons I learned from him were things like respect for the outdoors and engaging in outdoor activities with others, especially family. For us, it was a family activity, so it was always my dad and myself that were going out, and my mom and sister enjoyed the outdoor too. Sometimes a little bit different ways. They weren't big into the hunting side, but they enjoyed. My mom especially enjoyed hiking. In fact, she was a big fan of the state parks. And in fact, as we grew up, she made sure that we visited every state park in Virginia. Awesome. So we would go there and spend summer times in the cabins there, you know, and those are old rustic cabins. So it's not like you had a lot of conveniences of home, and we would always have opportunities to hike and fish and bring back neat mementos of those places. In fact, one of the places I remember the most is Ferrystone State Park, which is near Bassett, Virginia. And Ferrystone State Park is named after the Ferrystones that you find there. Very, very unique stones that are formed in the earth, and they just happen to come to the earth's surface there. So I remember I still have my bag of those old Ferrystones that we found there at Ferrystone State Park. So it was pretty neat to be able to go to those places. Westmoreland State Park, which is right here where I live. We spent summers in the cabin there. I'll never forget going along the shores of the Potomac River and finding shark's teeth. In fact, I have some shark's teeth from Carcharodon, which is the prehistoric giant white shark. I have one that's the size of my hand. So just phenomenal, you know, opportunities there. I remember growing up with my dad, we had an old aluminum Starcraft boat, and we would go all kinds of places going fishing. In fact, I would argue we probably went out in conditions that we probably should have stayed at the dock, but we were adamant about getting out there and going fishing. So it's been great. And both of my children enjoy the outdoors growing up. Both of them went hunting and fishing with me. My daughter is a very good in the shooting sports. My son today is a commercial fisherman. He grew up fishing. In fact, when he was 11 years old, I took him on a long-range fishing trip out of San Diego, California, where we went out for 10 days. And I'll never forget the person who was running the trip, an Australian, his name was Dennis Braid, was giving me a hard time about why I was bringing an 11-year-old on a trip with all these adults, and we're going way out in the Pacific Ocean, and he was just chastising me. It was funny, though, at the end of the trip, of all of the 22 anglers on board, and all of these were very accomplished offshore anglers, all the anglers on board, little Josh Wittman, 11 years old, caught the second most fish of anybody on board. And at the end, Dennis Braid has this little ceremony where he recognizes people, and he called Josh up there and said, "Son, I owe you an apology." He said, "Because you were just phenomenal. We were out there in some pretty rough weather and never got seasick, never complained. In fact, he wore me out on that trip." So lot of fun. So we have a lot of great family legacies and stories that we tell. about our outdoor experience. And I'm blessed to live in this little small town and travel home every evening. So I get to go across the Potomac River and travel through the areas that I've grown up, traipsing through the woods and just enjoying what Mother Nature has to offer.
It sounds like a dream. And yeah, that corner of Virginia, for me as a transplant, I've done my best to learn the state, actually appreciate it, and not just come here and you just like stay in Northern Virginia where I live, but you have to, in order to develop a love of a state, especially if you're a nature lover and a conservationist and outdoors person, you really do have to see what the state has to offer. And I've grown to love seeing every corner. And it seems like your slice of Virginia is really just heavenly and ideal for all these activities you mentioned.
It is. We're blessed. We're blessed beyond compare to have great natural resources there. And, I think anybody that comes and visits us, is just mesmerized by the beauty here. Not just the natural resources, but the people and the historical resources here. I don't think there's a better place anywhere across the country. Of course, I'm a little biased, but I still feel.
No, it's a very beautiful state. I've loved living here for the last 8 years. And I tell people all the time, like, if you come to Virginia, you may not want to leave.
That's right.
That's what I always tell them. Before we talk about your policy background, I wanted to ask you more so about what some of your favorite species that you've targeted are from the fishing side and also from the hunting side too.
Well, listen, I enjoy all types of fishing, from fly fishing to freshwater fishing to saltwater fishing. If I would say that, I wouldn't say I have a preference, but I probably spend more time saltwater fishing. I love fishing out on the ocean in places like the Chesapeake Bay and the Sounds in North Carolina. It's just unbelievable. In fact, I was out yesterday, actually out between Sandbridge, Virginia, out in the Atlantic Ocean, not far offshore. We were only maybe as far as 10 miles out, but we were between Sandbridge, Virginia, and we went all the way down to Corolla, North Carolina, if you were to draw a line out from the coast. And just amazing. Yesterday, saw a giant manta ray, and we caught a couple of cobia off of following this manta ray. Saw a half a dozen big leatherback turtles. One, we were in a 22 foot boat, and one was half the length of the boat. Just phenomenal critters, and we were able to get right up to it. And we had a potted dolphin yesterday. I say a potted dolphin, a big potted dolphin, probably 200 dolphin in this pod. And we were out there just drifting around, looking for to catch some bait. And these dolphin all came up to the boat, and they were little juvenile dolphin with them, and they were just having a ball. And it, it's those type of experiences. I tell folks the good thing about it is fish don't live in ugly places, and the amount of life that we saw yesterday is just phenomenal. So listen, we didn't catch anything really significant yesterday. In fact, we only had 3 fish that we kept. Everything else that we released. But it was the experience of yesterday that will stick in my mind more so than what we caught. So, we're just blessed. So I would say I probably tend a little bit more towards the saltwater side of things, but I rarely, if ever, turn down an opportunity to go fishing.
Yeah, how could you even? Because Virginia actually has a lot of different species. So one of my personal targets is to get a bull red drum, because I know in the lower Chesapeake Bay, we have such a great fishery, almost one that rivals Venice, Louisiana's. And I keep seeing pictures of people catching it, and I'm like, I need to get this at some point. So like, that's one of my personal goals, to get that. But people underestimate just the different type of fisheries we have here. And our trout fishing is outstanding too. People underestimate our trout fishery, and just fly fishing too, especially among people who are young professionals like myself. It is such a big thing here. I cannot believe just seeing that,
Yeah. Well, we got to get you out there. This time of year, the schools of red drum are right in the mouth of the bay and then out in the ocean. And, last year we got on a big school of red drum and a big school of black drum. Nice. And we followed this one school of red drum just by ourselves. It was just my friend of mine and I, and we were able to stay on this group of fish. They let us pester them for about an hour. And we caught and released about 30 big bull red drum. The biggest one was right at 58 inches. We believe probably a 60-pound fish. So just phenomenal fisheries. So Gabriella, we have to get you out there. It is phenomenal to see a school of red drum literally with 500 or 600 fish in the school, and not a fish smaller than 45 inches. So
I'll actually be in the area in a few weeks, so I'll touch base back with you maybe, and then we can link
Please,
up.
please
Yeah,
do. Please
yeah.
do. I
My
will
dad would
connect
be
you with
along too.
folks that can help you fulfill that bucket list
Sure.
wish.
Sure, and we can make a fun video doing it too if you're interested as well.
That's right. We can do that.
So I was perusing through your background, and I know that you've done a lot in conservation. And right before you got to Congress, you were actually quite involved in the environmental side of things here in Virginia. Can you talk about that experience and how that's kind of influenced your work in Congress as a result?
Absolutely. Well, I spent a number of years in local government, from the Montrose Town Council to the Westmoreland County Board of Supervisors, and then to the General Assembly, and was very active in assuring that we were doing everything possible to preserve our natural resources. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, I was able to secure some NIFWIF grants, which is the National Wildlife Foundation grant process, to reestablish some oyster reefs here in the county. And then also worked at making sure that we were engaging sportsmen and other citizens to address occasionally where we had conflicts between hunters and landowners. I wanted to make sure that those things were resolved, because it's incredibly important for both landowners and hunters to make sure that they can enjoy the natural resources there that we have throughout the Northern Neck. And then in the General Assembly, making sure that we were doing things necessary to protect our natural resources. One was the easement program that we had in Virginia, making sure that we preserved that to where if you wanted to set your land aside in a permanent conservation easement, that you received a state tax credit. I worked very hard on that when there was an effort to allow that system or that program to expire. And then two, just simple things like with our Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, for years, the officers, the law enforcement officers there, were called game wardens. And of course, they do much more than enforce just game laws. They're out on the water enforcing fisheries laws. They do a lot too in wildlife preservation. So it's not all enforcement activities. So anyway, we was able to get the name of those conservation officers changed from game wardens to conservation officers, which is really a better term. And I try to make that distinction too in terms of what I do, especially too when it relates to the political realm. So if you look at the things that I worked on when I was a local government official, when I was in the General Assembly, and then today as a member of Congress and working on bills like the Great American Outdoors Act, like the Land and Water Conservation Fund, like enhancing fishery science to make sure we are better at making fishery science decisions. All those are pieces of legislation that I put forward. And I remind people on my side of the aisle that as you look at your political ideology, and folks on our side identify their ideology as conservative, which I am a conservative. And I tell them, if you are a conservative, then you are indeed a conservationist. You want to be able to conserve the natural resources that are given to us by our Creator. So it is perfectly aligned to be a conservative and to be a conservationist, to conserve these resources and to pursue public policies that maintains and enhances the value of these resources. We're all about the responsible use of resources, whether it's tax dollars or whether it's the resources that our Creator has given us. So I tell folks, this perfectly aligns with where conservatives should be ideologically. So I think that's one of the things too that I have tried when I was in Congress, or as I am in Congress, is to engage others and get them to see what the whole realm of conservatism is, and that does include being conservationist, and that is responsibly utilizing those great resources that our Creator has endowed us with.
Absolutely. And I think we're starting to see more Republicans kind of lead on that issue, obviously with the passage of the Great American Outdoors Act. And I think some people conflate kind of what the perceived view of conservation is, which is more preservationist type thinking,
Right.
rather than stewardship, which I think conservatives better respond to, which falls in line with conservation, of course. And I think it's good that we're starting to, or we see more Republicans starting to be proactive and on the offensive of this, just because I think Democrats on the other side of the aisle have largely defined Republicans in a negative way. And sometimes the Republican response to conservation or environmental issues has been kind of like a Democrat light response. So it's good to see members like yourself trying to say, no, well, you can actually go about it from a conservation, conservative type of perspective, rather than just regurgitating and kind of like putting a Republican blanket on something, rather than actually saying you could still do this, you could still be for limited government, you could still be obviously for kind of the individual, but here's how you can do it where it doesn't come at the expense of taxpayers and things of that sort.
Well, that's it. And Gabriella, you hit the nail on the head, and that is how do we empower the owners of these resources? And when it comes to public lands, it's the citizens of the United States that own those lands. But remember, as you point out, we are stewards of what God has given us, and that is these resources. So the question is how do you empower individuals to do even more in stewardship? And you're right, there is a distinction between preservation and conservation. Conservation means the responsible use in harmony with the treasures that are part of those resources, to make sure that we conserve them. And that, I think, is the key. And how do we empower people along those lines? I mean, one of the bills I was able to get passed was one that allowed groups of citizens that volunteer to help maintain national wildlife refuge lands. They're called friends groups. How do we empower them and allow some of the government resources that go to maintain these public lands in the wildlife refuge system? How do we allow some of those dollars also to be leveraged by these citizens group that want to do the work? I mean, instead of having to hire folks, these citizens groups want to do the work with a little bit of resources, like some gravel for them to help, stabilize a road. I mean, they've done wonderful, wonderful work. And that's a perfect way that I think conservatives, Republicans can go in and say, this is how we as communities, we as states, we as a nation can individually do our part to preserve or to conserve what our Creator has given us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I kind of see this happening with the Trump administration in terms of their approach to conservation. I've seen a lot of people, I have a lot of contacts out west who have told me they feel a lot more reassured by how they're administering public lands management, giving a voice to conservation stakeholders who felt kind of voiceless in the past. What is your reaction to all that? Because I bet you've seen similarly, you've heard from different people who say they're private landowners or perhaps different constituencies, maybe watermen, who've said that there's a little bit more of a balance when it comes to natural resources management. More people have an input, and I've just heard from many different people. Obviously there's opposition, of course you're going to find that typical opposition, but I think what people fail to underscore sometimes is that even if you dislike an administration, you could still kind of look at kind of the good work that they're doing. And I think people are recognizing that they're kind of bringing a balance to what was previously in place when it came to these type of issues and these type of concerns. Is that kind of something you see as well?
Gabriella, I do. I see the administration going to every possible length to involve as many people as possible in this effort. And I think if you only align your efforts with those that are within a very narrow stream of your thought, then you don't do everything possible to make sure that we have the maximum support and effort to conserve these natural resources. The more people that you involve, the better. The more citizens that see value in those natural resources, the better off we all are, regardless of your political ideology. And I know sometimes people get caught up in what particular groups are doing or what they're doing. The key is how do we make sure engage all of them? And listen, there's going to be some disagreement across the lines about what the public policy should be. But I believe this, that amongst all of those groups, there is a common line of agreement, and that is we must do everything possible to conserve this national treasure, and that is our natural resources. Mm-hmm. And when we do, everybody gets to enjoy that. So this is not unique to one political ideology, and the things that we need to do don't fall within one category of ideas or solutions. They fall across a wide category. And why can't we do all of those? We should be able to do that without having to worry about, well, does this meet a particular prescription of what one group says should be done or what one group says shouldn't be done? No, I think there's so much that can be done to conserve what we are endowed by our Creator, that all of us should be able to say, okay, let's get these things done, and then listen, we can have a debate about some of the other elements, but there's so much more that we have in common than we have in differences. So that, I think, is a great opportunity for all of us as we pursue these efforts to conserve our natural resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there are certainly, I think everyone has the same amiable goals. Some may not, because we see that, unfortunately, on the other side, or the more preservationist side, I would say, they don't want to agree to anything. If anything relating to hunting, there's so much opposition to any effort led by a hunting group. So unfortunately, you're going to find some people who are just reluctant. They're never going to partake. But there are some groups that are kind of in the middle, that are more open. I see a lot more groups kind of open-minded to things, which is reassuring. And they're recognizing that sometimes you don't need the government. You can, incentivize individuals and landowners to take care of stuff. And perhaps that may be a better alternative than just always relying on the government. Although government does have some basic assurances and responsibility to safeguard things, but sometimes states and localities and individuals can be empowered, where the government may not have resources to dedicate, or maybe they feel that they should better delegate those responsibilities to others.
No, I agree, Gabriella. And if you look at the things that I think we can do together, it should be emphasizing those elements where we agree. And listen, there will be some that disagree. And listen, I'm a biologist by training or by education, and I do see that there is a value to harvesting animals. We'll call it hunting, and that's exactly what it is. But it truly is the harvest of those animals. And from a biological standpoint, we all know that our Earth has a certain carrying capacity, it's called, and that is, we have the natural resources to support certain populations of animals, including human beings. And it is part of that, to manage that. Human beings have always been part of that process of the food chain. And some folks have said, well, we're more civilized than that right now. We don't need to be part of the food chain. But we are. I mean, just by the very nature of who we are part of that. And we are part of being able to intelligently manage these animal populations, so the animal populations are healthy. They fall within the capacity of the environment to support them. Listen, there's nothing worse than to have animal populations that exceed the carrying capacity of the environment and destroy habitats, and then become overpopulated, and then die due to overpopulation and disease. I mean, we talk about humanity. That is much, much more objectionable in my mind than it is to have a thoughtful, humane harvest of those animals, and then make sure those animals are used. I mean, we have lots of great organizations out there that go to extraordinary lengths to make sure that those animals are used to feed the hungry and to do good things. So again, I think if you look at it just strictly from that standpoint, that there is a role for mankind in the realm of hunting and harvesting animals to maintain healthy populations and to manage those animal populations in the way that's best for the animals and best for mankind.
Yeah, it all falls in line with the North American model of wildlife conservation, which is kind of the unofficial guidebook for how all of us should kind of be orienting ourselves as sportsmen, probably in your respect as a public policy person, legislating, obviously. And there are a lot of unspoken rules. And I want to ask you, about kind of what you personally think can be done to attract more people to hunting and even to fishing. Kind of taking away your public policy hat. I know there are lots of remedies in that respect in the legislative front, but what do you think personally can be done? What are you doing, I would say, personally, to kind of bring in a new generation of hunters, aside from your kids, who seem to be pretty well situated?
Yes. Well, besides my children and my grandchildren, I do a lot to help engage others. In fact, I've been really focused on getting our wounded warriors out in the field to go hunting. I think it's a great opportunity for them. Many of them have never been there. Many of them are struggling with the after effects of having served this country in combat. There's nothing more soothing than for them to get out and see Mother Nature. I take them waterfowl hunting, and we come down to the northern neck on the shores of the Rappahannock River. And that time of year, of course, all times of year, but that time of year especially, it's beautiful. There are tens of thousands of geese in the area, and there's nothing like watching these waterfowl fly around. And then the challenge of being able to bring them in and then harvest them, and then being able to enjoy these geese. In fact, what we'll do is take them back. We have a barn there. We'll take them back and actually clean the geese and then fix them right there, so they know, how can you enjoy these animals, and again, or these birds, and again, we're doing the responsible thing in managing these populations of geese, and then too, giving an experience to these wounded warriors who, from that point on, become true champions of the ability to go out and hunt. And then too, what goes along with that is, remember, hunters too do more than probably any other group to preserve habitat.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you look at waterfowl hunters, they buy a duck stamp each year. Those duck stamp dollars go to preserve habitat, to preserve wintering habitat, to preserve nesting habitat. Look at organizations like Ducks Unlimited and Delta Waterfowl and things that they do. So, these young men and women that have served our nation all of a sudden get an appreciation for the experience, and then get an appreciation for what it takes to conserve those critical resources like wetlands. And I remind people that wetlands not only are places for our waterfowl to winter and nest, but they're also the nursery grounds for lots of other things that we treasure: the fish, the oysters, the crabs, and everything that's part of the food chain. So it's a multi-valued prospect to put together these efforts so that people can enjoy the resources, but then understand the importance of this habitat to the things that all of us must be doing.
Very well said. Yeah, and I think people fail to notice that a critical component actually to conservation funding is guns and ammo sales. And I've tried to communicate that to people. And I know some people may be watching and be like, oh gosh, they're talking about guns. It's typical of Republicans. But people forget that a large chunk of that money comes from those sales. And actually, I think we're going to see probably a big surge in conservation funding, given all the purchasing that's going on right now, because people are concerned about their safety, or maybe they want to buy hunting rifles too. But I think largely due to personal safety reasons, we're going to kind of see a surge, hopefully, in conservation funding.
Yes, I think we will. I mean, just initially, what we're seeing is that there will be an increase in funding from the resources that come from the dollars that are yielded by the sale of firearms and of ammunition, and those dollars go directly to those conservation efforts, which is great. I mean, again, another example of sportsmen funding the preservation of these habitats, and many times that goes unnoticed. I mean, folks sometimes will recognize the major organizations that work in the conservation realm, but if you look at the total amount of resources that are dedicated to conserving our natural resources, hunters are at the top of the list.
Absolutely. All right, so it's almost kicking me out, but Congressman Wittman, where can people connect with you?
Sure, they can go to our website, which is wittman.house.gov. That's wittman.house.gov. And you go there, you can connect with us on Facebook. Please follow us on Facebook, on Twitter or Instagram. You can also call us at 202-225-4261. Please stay in touch with us. You can sign up for our daily e-newsletters. We send a lot of information out, especially on things that we do in the conservation realm. And it's a two-way street. Through that, too, you can communicate back to us. So we'd love to have people communicate with us and follow us in the information that we put out.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Congressman Wittman, for speaking with me and talking about the outdoors. I will try to circle back and connect with you, and maybe we can go out on the water and chat even more.
Yeah, we will make that happen.